My name is James Covington. I am 75 years old, and I paid $200,000 for my daughter's wedding. The night before the ceremony, her fiancé called to uninvite me. He said the wedding was only for important people. I didn't argue. I just hung up the phone and made 3 quiet calls. By sunrise, his entire world had vanished. Before I tell you how, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Let me know in the comments below. And please like and subscribe if you believe that respect is more valuable than money. The air in my workshop always smelled the same. It smelled of pine, cedar, and 50 years of hard work. It was my sanctuary. On the eve of my only daughter Amelia's wedding, I was in that sanctuary, putting the final touches on my real wedding gift to her. Not the $200,000 I had transferred into a joint account for the party, but a small jewelry box hand-carved from a piece of walnut I had saved for 30 years. My hands, though spotted, moved with a familiar grace, the wood plane gliding smoothly, peeling away a perfect, paper-thin curl. Each pass was a memory, each stroke a prayer for her happiness. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound. It was a peaceful sound, a sound of a life built on solid things. Then the shrill ring of my cell phone tore through the quiet. It was an ugly, modern sound in this timeless place. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and answered. It was Preston. His voice was clipped, impatient, lacking any of the warmth you'd expect from a man about to marry your daughter. There was no friendly greeting. No, how are you? He went straight to business. James, he said, and the way he used my first name felt like a small, deliberate jab. I'm calling to inform you of a last-minute change to the arrangements for tomorrow. I waited, my hand frozen over the smooth walnut. After some consideration, he continued, his voice dripping with a false, corporate politeness, we've decided to keep the ceremony itself very private, intimate, just for important people. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Important people. The phrase echoed in the quiet workshop. I, the man who had raised Amelia, who had held her when she cried and celebrated her when she soared, was not considered important enough to see her get married. I, the man whose sweat and sacrifice had paid for every single champagne flute and floral arrangement he would proudly display, was being told to stay home. I said nothing. My silence seemed to unnerve him because he quickly added more. You understand, of course, with my business partners and associates attending, we need to maintain a certain image. It's about optics. It's just better this way. And then came the final cruel twist of the knife. Amelia agrees, he said, the lie slipping so easily from his tongue. She understands it's what's best for my career. That was it. That was the moment the floor fell out from under me. It wasn't just the insult to me anymore. He had used my daughter, my Amelia, as a shield for his own cruel ambition. He had made her complicit in her own father's humiliation. The storm that gathered inside me was silent. There was no thunder, no lightning, just a cold, heavy calm. I took a slow breath, the scent of pine filling my lungs. I looked at the unfinished jewelry box on my bench. All the love I had poured into it felt like a foolish waste. I cleared my throat, and when I spoke, my voice was level, steady, and terrifyingly calm. I understand, I said. Then I ended the call. For a long time, I just stood there. The only sound was the buzz of the overhead lights. The world I had known, the future I had pictured, had been fractured by a single phone call. I put down my plane, its polished steel cool against the worn wood of the workbench. My hands, which had built homes and furniture and a family, were trembling slightly, not from rage, but from a profound and chilling clarity. My eyes fell upon a photograph on my workbench, tucked away behind a jar of wood stain. It was an old black and white picture of my late wife, Loretta. It was taken the year we opened our business, Covington & Sons Event Supply, out of a rented garage. She was laughing, a streak of paint on her cheek, her eyes full of a fire that could light up the world. We had nothing back then except for each other and a belief that if we worked hard and treated people right, we could build something that would last. I could almost hear her voice, a warm and steady whisper in the quiet of the workshop. Jimmy, she used to say, her hand on my arm, money is just paper. It burns. Respect is the house you build with it. Don't you ever let anyone tear down your house. Preston hadn't just insulted me. He had taken a sledgehammer to the foundation of the house Loretta and I had built. He had looked at a lifetime of integrity, hard work, and community, and decided it was worthless, unimportant. He had looked at my daughter, the most precious part of our legacy, and saw only a stepping stone for his own ambition. I turned and looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the workshop window. I saw the face of a 75-year-old man, a man who had earned his gray hairs and the lines around his eyes, a man who had built an empire not on ruthless deals, but on handshakes and his word, a man who had become so important in his own world that the entire events industry of Atlanta knew his name, yet was deemed unimportant by a boy playing dress-up in a suit he hadn't even paid for himself. The decision formed in my mind not as a hot-headed plan for revenge, but as a cold, necessary correction, a rebalancing of the scales. I wasn't going to destroy Preston's wedding. I wasn't going to cause a scene or beg for my daughter's attention. I would do what he asked. I would simply not participate in any way, and I would let the quiet weight of my absence show them what important really meant. I left the workshop and walked into the quiet of the house. The scent of sawdust followed me like a ghost. In the living room, a house built on love and hard work, everything felt foreign, now tainted by the insult that had just been delivered. My first instinct was to protect, to shield, to fix. But I knew this was not a problem that could be fixed with my hands. This was a sickness of the heart, and I feared it had infected my daughter. I had to know for sure. I had to hear her voice. My hands felt heavy as I picked up the phone and dialed her number. Part of me, a foolish, hopeful part, prayed that she would answer, furious on my behalf, that she would say, "Daddy, I can't believe what Preston did. I'm putting a stop to this right now." I held on to that sliver of hope as the phone rang once, twice. "Daddy." Her voice was small, hesitant. The false brightness she usually had was gone. She knew why I was calling. I kept my own voice gentle. There was no room for anger here, only a deep, aching need for the truth. "Amelia," I said softly. "I just got off the phone with Preston." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a rush of words that tumbled over each other, a confession of guilt before any accusation was made. "Oh, Daddy, I was just about to call you. I swear I'm so sorry. It was all so last minute. Everything is just crazy right now. You know how it is." She was talking fast, filling the silence, because she was terrified of what I might say in it. I let her finish, and then I simply stated the fact. "He told me I'm not to come to your wedding tomorrow." The silence that followed was heavy with everything she wasn't saying. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, almost a whisper, as if she was repeating lines someone had fed her. "I know, and I feel terrible about it. It's just, Preston thinks it's for the best. It's for his career." She added the words, sounding hollow and foreign in her mouth. "You know how important this is for him, Daddy. All his partners will be there, and he needs to make a good impression. It's about the optics." Optics, a cold, clinical word for discarding your own family. I had to ask. I had to hear her say it. "And what do you think, Amelia? Not what Preston thinks. What do you think?" Another long, painful pause. I could almost hear the struggle in her mind, the battle between her conscience and the man she thought she loved. The battle was over quickly. "We'll have a private family dinner next week," she said, her voice weak. "I promise. Just us. It'll be even better that way, right?" And in that moment, I felt a sorrow so profound it almost buckled my knees. My daughter, the fierce little girl who once climbed the tallest tree on our street just to prove she could, was gone. In her place was this echo, this shadow, afraid to speak her own mind. Arguing with her now would be like yelling at the wind. It would only push her further into his arms, making me the villain of a story he was writing for her. My fight was not with her. It was for her. The love I felt for her swelled in my chest, a painful, protective ache. I had to end the call before she heard the break in my voice. "All right, sweetheart," I said, the words costing me more than she would ever know. "You get some rest. You have a big day tomorrow." I hung up the phone before she could reply. I placed it gently on the table. The last thread of hope, the one where this was all a terrible misunderstanding, had been severed. This was no misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, calculated act of erasure. And the call had given me the one thing I needed most, confirmation. I was no longer just a man defending his own pride. I was a father fighting for the soul of his daughter. The quiet in the house felt different now. It was no longer the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of strategy. The quiet of a plan beginning to form, and the next calls I made would not be gentle at all. After the call with my daughter, I walked from the living room into my study. The air in here was different. It didn't smell of wood and varnish. It smelled of old leather and paper, of decisions made and ledgers balanced. This was the room where Covington & Sons was truly built, not with hammers and saws, but with handshakes and my word. I sat down in my worn leather chair, the one that had held me through 40 years of business deals, triumphs, and disasters. The deep sorrow from Amelia's call settled into a hard, cold resolve. There was no more room for doubt. It was time to act. I didn't need to look up the number. I knew it by heart. I dialed, and the phone was answered on the second ring. A polite voice answered, but I cut straight through the formalities. "Michael Shaw, please. Tell him it's James Covington." A moment later, a familiar, warm voice came on the line. "Jimmy, good to hear from you. I hope you're not calling to tell me you're unretiring again." David would have my hide. I appreciated his attempt at humor, but I had no time for it tonight. My tone shifted, became the voice I used when $1 million deal was on the line. "Michael, I'm sorry to call you at home, but this is an urgent and sensitive matter." The warmth in his voice instantly vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of the best banker in Atlanta. "Of course, James. What do you need?" I took a steadying breath. This was the first move, the one that would set everything else in motion. "Michael, I need you to execute a request. I need you to freeze joint account number $74491 effective immediately." I gave him the number from memory, the account I had opened with so much hope only 6 months ago. The wedding account. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Michael knew that account. He had helped me set it up. He knew what it was for. "James," he began, his voice cautious. "The wedding is tomorrow. Are you sure about this?" "I am absolutely sure," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "The reason you will log for this action is as follows: suspected financial fraud." I chose the word fraud with deliberate care. It wasn't just a word. It was a shield. A vague family dispute could be questioned, perhaps even legally challenged by Preston. But the suspicion of fraud gives a bank absolute authority to act instantly to protect the assets without question. And in a way, it was the truth. Preston was attempting to fraudulently separate my daughter from her family, from her heritage, all funded by my money. He was trying to acquire a family, a name, and a bankroll through deception. If that wasn't a form of fraud, I didn't know what was. Michael was quiet for another moment. He was a good man and a better banker. He didn't ask for the whole story. My tone and our 30-year history told him everything he needed to know. "Understood, James," he said, his voice now crisp and professional. "Consider it done. I'll handle the paperwork personally in the morning. As of this moment, that $200,000 account is frozen solid. Nothing goes in and nothing comes out." "Thank you, Michael." "Anytime, Jimmy. You know that." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. I felt no satisfaction, no thrill of victory, just the grim feeling of a surgeon who has just made a necessary, painful incision. The foundation of Preston's grand illusion, the money, was now gone. He just didn't know it yet. He was sleeping peacefully, dreaming of his perfect wedding, unaware that the ground beneath his feet had already crumbled away. One call down, 2 more to go. I didn't let myself linger on the grim satisfaction of that first call. There was no time. A plan is like a structure. It must be built in the right order, with each piece supporting the next. I had removed the financial fuel for Preston's grand performance. Now I had to take away his stage. I scrolled through my contacts to a name I hadn't needed to look up in 20 years. John Mallister, the general manager of the Biltmore Ballrooms. John and I went way back. I remembered when he was just a junior event manager full of big ideas and a small budget. I remembered a time in the early 90s when a recession hit Atlanta hard and the Biltmore was on the verge of collapse. The banks wouldn't give him a loan. His suppliers were demanding cash up front, all except for one. I told him, "John, you pay me when you can. Just keep those ballroom doors open." He never forgot that. Our relationship wasn't built on invoices and contracts. It was built on trust forged in the fires of shared history. This was going to be the hardest call of the night. I dialed his direct line. He answered immediately, his voice as smooth and professional as ever, but with a friendly warmth reserved for old friends. "Jimmy Covington, to what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you're finally taking me up on that golf game we've been talking about for 10 years. A knot tightened in my stomach. I wish that's what this was. "John," I said, my voice somber, and the warmth in his immediately vanished. He knew my tones. "I'm afraid this isn't a pleasant call." "What's wrong, Jimmy?" he asked, all business now. I took no pleasure in what I was about to do. I was about to create a massive headache for a man I respected. But the thought of Preston standing in one of John's ballrooms, raising a glass of my champagne while I was uninvited and my daughter was trapped, gave me the strength I needed. "John, I'm calling about the Vanderbilt wedding tomorrow," I said, my voice low and even. "I am deeply sorry to be telling you this at the 11th hour, but due to a severe and unforeseen family matter, the final payment for the event will not be clearing." The silence on the other end was profound. I could picture him in his office, looking at the master schedule, at the logistics for a 300-person wedding that was mere hours away. A cancellation of this magnitude this late was a nightmare. But his first question was not about the money. "A family matter?" he asked, his voice full of genuine concern. "My God, Jimmy, is everyone all right?" That single question told me I had been right to trust him. "It is a difficult and private situation, John," I said, avoiding the lie, but protecting the truth. "I can't say any more than that, but what I can say with absolute certainty is that this event cannot and will not proceed." I heard him let out a long, slow sigh. It was the sound of a man accepting a terrible reality he couldn't change. He knew my character. He knew I would never do this unless it was the only option left. He was a professional, but he was also my friend. "I understand, Jimmy," he said, the weariness evident in his voice. "Don't you worry about this end. I'll handle it. I hope whatever is happening, your family will be okay." "Thank you, John," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "That means more than you know." We hung up. I stared at the phone. The second domino had fallen. The money was gone. The magnificent ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and gilded ceilings was now just an empty, silent room. Preston Vanderbilt, the man obsessed with image and status, was now the host of a phantom wedding. He had a guest list, a bride, and a tuxedo. But he no longer had a party. Not yet, anyway. I knew his arrogance. He would try to find another stage. It was time for my final call. It was time to make sure that every other door in Atlanta was closed, locked, and bolted. I set the phone down, the click of it settling into its cradle echoing in the silent study. 2 calls made, 2 pillars of Preston's fantasy, wedding knocked out from under him. But I knew him. His arrogance was a powerful engine. He wouldn't give up. He would see this as a challenge, a problem to be solved with money and frantic phone calls. He would spend the entire night trying to find a new stage for his show. It was time to make sure that when he started making those calls, all he would hear was the sound of doors slamming shut. It was time for my final call of the night. This one was different. I wasn't calling a banker or a business associate. I was calling family. I dialed the number of David Green, the first employee I ever hired 45 years ago. He was more than a manager to me. He was my right hand, my confidant, the brother I never had. He had been there when my Amelia was born. He had held her in his arms at her christening and taught her how to drive in the parking lot of our old warehouse. He loved her like she was his own. He would understand. He answered before the first ring finished, his voice thick with sleep, but immediately alert. "Mr. James, it's late. Is everything all right?" I was tired. The emotional weight of the night was pressing down on me, but my voice remained steady. This was the final move. It had to be precise. David, I said, I need you to do something for me. Something quiet and something with no questions asked. I could feel him straighten up on the other end of the line. Anything, you know that. I need you to get on the phone tonight, I said. Call our primary partners, the rental companies, the caterers, the florists, everyone. Inform them that effective immediately, Covington & Sons is experiencing a sudden and severe logistical failure. I let the corporate lie hang in the air. It was a clean, unquestionable excuse. We're unable to provide any equipment, linens, or services for any new events booked this weekend. Emphasize that we are deeply sorry for the inconvenience, but there can be no exceptions. There was a long pause. David was a smart man. He knew Amelia's wedding was tomorrow. He knew I would move heaven and earth to make that day perfect. For me to be calling him in the middle of the night to effectively shut down our own network meant that something catastrophic had happened. When he spoke, his voice was low, tight with a cold fury that mirrored my own. That boy, he said, and it wasn't a question. That boy she's marrying. He finally did something unforgivably foolish, didn't he? I didn't need to answer. My silence was his confirmation. Just make the calls, David, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. Please. His response was immediate, a testament to a lifetime of loyalty. Consider it done, Mr. James, he said, his voice now like steel. I'm getting out of bed right now. I'll call every single person on our list, from the biggest hotel to the smallest bakery. By the time the sun comes up, no one in this city will be able to rent a single clean fork with that boy's name on the invoice. You have my word. I hung up the phone. It was done. The trap was set. The money was gone. The venue was gone. And now the entire support system of the Atlanta events industry was gone. I had built that network over 50 years, handshake by handshake, favor by favor. And tonight I had called in all the debts of respect I was owed. I felt a profound weariness wash over me. I walked out of the study, through the dark and silent house, and back into my workshop. I looked at the unfinished jewelry box on the bench. Tomorrow, my daughter's heart would break. But I knew with the certainty of a father who loves his child more than life itself, that it was better to have a heart broken for a day than to have it slowly crushed over a lifetime. I had done all I could. Now all that was left was to wait for the storm. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my study, the house dark and quiet around me, and watched as the sky over Atlanta slowly bled from black to a deep, bruised purple, then finally to a pale, indifferent gray. It was the morning of my daughter's wedding. I imagined the scene in their penthouse apartment, high above the city. I pictured Preston waking up, not with a heart full of love for his bride, but with the buzzing excitement of a showman on opening night. For him, this wasn't a marriage. It was an acquisition, a merger, a 300-person networking event designed to launch his career into the stratosphere. As I later learned, the morning unfolded exactly as I knew it would. He had been awake since dawn, not beside Amelia, but in his home office, wearing a silk robe and pacing the floor while he made calls. He looked out of his floor-to-ceiling windows down at the sprawling city below, seeing it not as a community of people, but as a board game he was about to win. Amelia found him there, a cup of coffee in his hand, looking like a king surveying his domain. He barely acknowledged her, just gave a distracted smile, and continued his call. He was confirming the arrival of a custom ice sculpture, a gaudy monument to his own ego. That was the call that brought his world crashing down. He was speaking to John Mallister, though he didn't know the man's name or our history. To Preston, he was just another vendor to be managed. "Yes, this is Preston Vanderbilt," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm just calling to confirm the ice sculpture has arrived and is being stored correctly. I won't accept any imperfections." There was a cool, professional pause on the other end of the line. Then John's voice, calm and final. "Mr. Vanderbilt, I'm afraid there has been a serious misunderstanding. There is no Vanderbilt event scheduled at this venue today." Preston laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "That's absurd," he snapped. "Check again. The Biltmore Ballrooms, 300 guests. My assistant booked it months ago." I am aware of the booking that was in our system, sir, John replied, his voice unshakable. However, that booking was canceled late last night due to a failure to render the final payment. The color began to drain from Preston's face. A failure of payment? Impossible. The funds are in a dedicated account. There are $200,000 in that account. That may be, John said, delivering the final devastating blow. But I was informed by the bank that the account was frozen by the primary account holder. I'm sorry, sir. The decision is final. We are fully booked with another client. Preston was speechless for a moment, his mind racing. Primary account holder. The words hung in the air. He stammered, his arrogance finally cracking. This is my wedding day. Do you have any idea who I am? The people who will be attending. I'm very sorry for your inconvenience, Mr. Vanderbilt, John said, and then the line went dead. Preston stared at his phone, his face a mask of pure fury. He threw it, but it landed harmlessly on a thick white Persian rug, a pathetic gesture of rage. It was then that Amelia walked into the room, radiant in a white silk bridal robe, her face glowing with the innocent excitement of the day she had dreamed of her entire life. She saw the look on his face, and her own smile faltered. Honey, what is it? What's wrong? He turned on her, his eyes wild. He didn't see his bride. He saw an obstacle, an annoyance. He forced a dismissive wave of his hand. It's nothing, he lied, his voice tight with rage. Some incompetent fool at the Biltmore made a clerical error with the payment. Ridiculous. He tried to project confidence to maintain the illusion of control. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. There are 100 places in this city that would kill to host our wedding. I'll have it fixed in an hour. He said the words with all the bravado he could muster. But Amelia saw it. For the first time, she saw past the charming facade, past the expensive suit and the confident smile. She saw a flicker of pure animal panic in his eyes. She watched him grab his phone and stalk into the other room, his voice already barking orders at someone else on the line. And as she stood there alone in her bridal robe, surrounded by the cold, empty luxury of his apartment, the first icy seed of doubt began to plant itself in her heart. The perfect day had fractured, and she was beginning to realize that the man she was about to marry was a stranger. I can only imagine the scene in that penthouse, the air thick with a cocktail of expensive cologne and rising panic. Preston, a man who believed any problem could be solved by yelling into a phone and throwing money at it, was about to get a masterclass in the true nature of power. He stalked into his office, a room with a view of the entire city, and began his frantic assault on the hospitality industry of Atlanta. He was still operating under the illusion that he was the customer, that he was the one in charge. He would soon learn that a city is not a marketplace. It's an ecosystem, a complex web of relationships and loyalties. And he had just insulted the man who had spent a lifetime spinning that web. His first calls were to the giants, the five-star fortresses of luxury he so admired. He dialed the Four Seasons, his voice laced with the arrogant assumption that they would be grateful for his business. This is Preston Vanderbilt, he announced. I have a party of 300 of Atlanta's most influential people. I need your grand ballroom tonight. Money is no object. The manager on the other end was impeccably polite, his voice smooth as silk. Mr. Vanderbilt, it would be our distinct honor to host you under normal circumstances. Unfortunately, it is quite impossible today. Our primary logistics and supply partner, Covington & Sons, has informed us of a major citywide operational failure. We can't guarantee service. We can't even get enough clean linens for a party of 30, let alone 300. Preston scoffed. Covington? That's just one company. What about your other suppliers? He hung up before the manager could answer, already dialing the St. Regis. The story there was the same. Then the Ritz-Carlton. Then the Waldorf Astoria. The names of the hotels changed, but the polite, regretful refrain did not. Covington & Sons. The name of the unimportant old man was suddenly everywhere. A ghost haunting the phone lines, a name he couldn't escape. I can picture him loosening his collar, the first bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. From the doorway, Amelia watched, her beautiful wedding dress hanging in its bag like a silk and lace question mark. her anxiety growing with every failed call. His strategy shifted. If the giants were out, he would go for the boutique players. He was a shark, sensing weakness, looking for a way around the obstacle. He started calling smaller, high-end venues, independent catering companies, believing he could piece together a solution himself. This is where the polite wall of corporate excuses began to crumble, replaced by the strange, baffling reality of a city that had quietly closed its doors to him. The first caterer he called sounded panicked. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vanderbilt. I can't help you. My refrigerated truck rental was just canceled. They told me there was an electrical fire at the depot. All their trucks are out of commission." The manager of a trendy loft space downtown was next. "We have the space, sir, but we have no staff. It's the strangest thing. A dozen of my best on-call waiters just called out sick this morning, all with the same 24-hour stomach flu." An equipment rental company on the other side of town told him, "We have chairs, thousands of them, but all 6 of our delivery trucks were just flagged for emergency maintenance inspections. The whole fleet is grounded. It's unbelievable." He was no longer just annoyed. He was bewildered. He was pacing the length of his apartment now, yelling into his phone, "What is wrong with this city today? Is everything falling apart?" He couldn't see the pattern. He couldn't see the invisible threads connecting all these strange, sudden accidents. He just felt the universe itself conspiring against him, and his arrogance began to curdle into a desperate, impotent rage. Finally, in a last-ditch effort, someone gave him the number for Beatrice Johnson, a legend in the business, a tough, no-nonsense event planner who had been orchestrating Atlanta's biggest parties since before Preston was born. He called her, his voice a frantic mess, launching into his tale of woe about the Biltmore and the series of unfortunate coincidences. We let him talk for about 30 seconds before cutting him off, her voice like gravel rolling downhill. "Let me stop you right there, son," she said. "I've been getting calls about you all morning. Let me guess, your name is Vanderbilt." Preston was stunned into silence. "I don't know what you did to piss off Jimmy Covington," Bea continued, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "But you just went and poked the biggest, quietest bear in the entire forest. You think this is a city of businesses, kid? You think you can just buy your way in? This is a city of relationships. And Jimmy Covington spent 50 years building every single one of them. The man you called unimportant co-signed the loan for the restaurant that catered my first big event. He sent his crews to work my husband's funeral for free because he knew I was struggling. He is the foundation of this entire industry." She wasn't finished. "You didn't just get canceled by a venue, son. You got canceled by Atlanta. There isn't a chef in this town who will poach an egg for you today. There isn't a valet who will park a car for your guests. From the silver forks you wanted to the dance floor you'd stand on. It all comes out of Jimmy's warehouse. You wanted a wedding for important people. Well, today you learned who the most important man in this town really is. My advice to you, find a preacher and a park bench and for God's sake, learn some respect." She hung up. Preston stood there holding a dead phone, the silence of the penthouse roaring in his ears. Every excuse, every illusion, every ounce of his arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only the cold, horrifying truth. He slowly, mechanically lowered the phone, and for the first time that day, he turned and looked at Amelia, his face ashen, the full crushing weight of what he had done finally crashing down upon him. "B." Johnson's final words hit the silence of that penthouse like a judge's gavel. "I wasn't there to see it, but I know how a man like Preston breaks. It isn't a slow crumble. It's a sudden, violent implosion. The foundations of his world, built on the flimsy scaffolding of arrogance and borrowed money, had been kicked out from under him. All that was left was a long fall. He stood there, the dead phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the roaring silence of his own failure. In his mind, I imagine he could see all the doors of Atlanta slamming shut one by one. The polite voices of the hotel managers, the strange excuses from the caterers, and finally BA's brutal, unvarnished truth, all swirled together into a single horrifying realization. He had made a fatal error. He had misjudged his opponent. He had picked a fight with the quietest man in the room, never realizing that the quietest man was the one who owned the room itself. A sound tore from his throat, a guttural roar of pure, helpless rage. He hurled his smartphone against the far wall. It wasn't the pathetic thud of it landing on a rug this time. It struck the hard plaster with a sickening crack, shattering into a spiderweb of glass and black plastic before skittering across the polished marble floor. The sound was sharp, ugly, and final. It was the sound of his control, his image, his entire meticulously crafted future breaking apart. He began to pace, not like a confident executive, but like a caged animal. His hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He muttered to himself, a stream of curses and disbelief. No, this can't be happening. Not to me. I had everything. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up. His mask of sophistication finally shattered, revealing the desperate, entitled child beneath. Amelia had been standing in the doorway the whole time, a silent witness to his unraveling. She had seen the confident swagger melt into confusion, then into frustration, and now into this raw, pathetic panic. B's words, though muffled through the phone, had reached her, and suddenly everything made a terrible, perfect sense. The endless parade of polite rejections, the strange, coordinated accidents all over the city, and the one name that echoed through it all. Covington, her name, her father's name. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper. It was a sound so quiet it was almost lost in Preston's frantic panting. Yet it cut through the room with the sharpness of a razor. It was Dad, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of dawning, terrifying clarity. It was him, wasn't it? Preston froze. He whipped around to face her, his face pale and twisted into an ugly sneer. There was no charm left, no handsome fiancé, just a cornered, desperate man looking for someone to blame. And his rage, finding no other target, finally landed on her. That old man, he spat, the words dripping with a venom that shocked her to her core. You're unimportant, meddling, blue-collar old man. He did this. He ruined it. He ruined everything. He took a step towards her, his voice rising to a frantic shout. This wedding was my key to this city. The partners, the investors, everyone was going to be there. I was going to be somebody. And he destroyed it all just because of his pathetic hurt feelings. He finally said it. He finally admitted that the wedding, and by extension she, was just a tool for his ambition. He saw her not as a partner, but as a prop. They stood there in the wreckage of their wedding morning, staring at each other as if for the first time. Preston, his ambition laid bare and his power revealed as a complete illusion. And Amelia, her heart shattered, but her eyes wide open. The horrifying realization was complete. For him, the knowledge that he had been utterly and completely outplayed by the one man he thought beneath him. And for her, the dawning, soul-shaking understanding that her father hadn't ruined her wedding day. He had just saved her entire life. I didn't have to wait long. I knew they would come. A man like Preston, when cornered, doesn't retreat. He attacks. It's the only move he knows. I was on my front porch, sitting in the old wooden rocker Loretta, and I bought at a flea market 30 years ago when I saw his car. It was a black foreign sedan, a silent predator that cost more than my first house. It tore down my quiet, tree-lined street, its engine a low growl that was completely out of place among the sounds of birdsong and children playing down the block. The car was a perfect symbol of the man driving it, loud, expensive, and disrespecting a world it didn't understand. I could only imagine the storm raging inside that leather and glass box. I could picture Preston gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his face a mask of crimson fury. I could hear his voice, not in person, but in my mind, a frantic tirade of blame and disbelief. He would be cursing my name, of course, calling me a meddling, vindictive old man. He would be threatening lawsuits, vowing revenge, blaming the city, the vendors, the world. Anyone but the person responsible, the man he saw in his own rearview mirror. His words would be empty, hollow threats, the last gasps of a king whose crown had just been revealed to be made of cardboard. And beside him in the passenger seat, my daughter Amelia would be silent. Her silence would be a different storm entirely. I could see her staring out the window, but seeing nothing the neat, historic homes of her childhood blurring into a watercolor of shame. Tears would be streaming down her face, not the loud, performative sobs of a spoiled child, but the quiet, soul-deep tears of someone facing the consequences of their own weakness. In the back seat, her beautiful wedding dress, still pristine in its silk bag, would hang like a ghost, a mocking reminder of the perfect day that had turned into a perfect disaster. Every red flag she had ignored, every gut feeling she had suppressed, every time she had chosen his ambition over her own family, would be replaying in her mind. His storm was loud and impotent. Hers was quiet and devastating. The black car screeched to a halt in front of my house, its tires protesting against the asphalt. The sight was almost comical. This sleek, angry machine parked crookedly in front of my modest brick home with its carefully tended rose bushes, the ones Loretta had planted. Preston burst out of the driver's side before the engine was even off. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His tie was askew. His face flushed with a rage that made him look small and childish. Amelia emerged from the other side much more slowly. She moved like someone in a dream, her body heavy with the weight of her regret. She looked at the house she grew up in, at the porch where she learned to read and the lawn where she learned to ride a bike, and her expression was one of profound, heartbreaking loss. She was a stranger here now, an exile returning to a kingdom she had willingly abdicated. They stormed up the walkway, Preston leading the charge like a failed general, and I waited for them. I didn't get up from my rocker. I simply watched them come. The confrontation I had engineered was finally here. I was in the back garden, Loretta's garden, when they arrived. The frantic slamming of car doors was an ugly intrusion into the afternoon peace. This was my true sanctuary, the place I came to feel close to her. The air here smelled of damp earth and the sweet, spicy scent of her favorite roses. My hands, gloved and steady, were tending to them, the sharp snip of the pruning shears a clean, satisfying sound as I trimmed away the dead wood to make room for new growth. It was a ritual, a conversation with her memory. I was not hiding. I was waiting, centered on my own ground. I heard the frantic footsteps on the stone path, and I finished the cut I was making before turning around slowly. Preston stormed into the garden first, his face a blotchy, ugly red. He looked like a wild bull trampling the carefully laid mulch, his expensive suit a ridiculous costume in this place of natural, quiet beauty. Amelia trailed behind him, a pale ghost in his destructive wake. He stopped a few feet from me, his chest heaving, and pointed a trembling finger. "You!" he spat, his voice shrill and cracking. "You did this. You called them, didn't you? You ruined my wedding. You ruined everything." His accusation, so full of impotent rage, seemed to just hang in the peaceful air and dissolve. I looked at him, at this angry, frightened boy who had tried to play a man's game, and I felt nothing but a profound pity. I looked past him to my daughter, and my heart ached with a sorrow that was almost too much to bear. Her face was a canvas of shame and disbelief, her eyes pleading with me, begging me to say it wasn't true. I took my time. I carefully wiped the blades of my shears with a cloth from my back pocket. I placed them gently on the old stone bench next to a bucket of dead leaves. I pulled off my dusty gloves, finger by finger, and laid them beside the shears. Every movement was slow, deliberate. I would not let his chaos dictate my peace. Finally, I folded my arms and met his gaze. My voice when I spoke was not loud. It did not have to be. "I didn't ruin anything, Preston," I said, the words clear and cold in the warm afternoon air. "I simply declined to participate." I let that sink in for a moment. "Last night," I continued, "you called me on the telephone and informed me that I was not important enough to attend my own daughter's wedding. I did not argue. I took you at your word. I accepted your assessment of my value in your world." I took a step closer, and he instinctively took a step back. "But you see, there are consequences to such evaluations. It just turns out that the money of an unimportant man isn't important enough to pay for the party. The champagne from an unimportant man isn't important enough to be served to your important guests. And the tables, the chairs, the linens, the forks, the knives, and the plates from an unimportant man's company are not important enough to supply an event of such magnitude." The logic of it, so simple and so absolute, struck him dumb. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He had built a cage of his own arrogance, and I had simply closed the door. Then I turned my full attention to my daughter. The hardness in my eyes softened into a deep, painful sorrow. I walked past Preston as if he wasn't even there and stood before Amelia. She wouldn't meet my gaze, her eyes fixed on the ground, on the scattered rose petals at her feet. "Amelia," I said gently, my voice now full of a lifetime of love and regret. "Look at me." Hesitantly, she lifted her tear-filled eyes to mine. "Look around you," I said, gesturing to the garden, the house, the ancient oak tree that shaded us both. "This life, this home, the business that paid for your education, and that was supposed to pay for this wedding. None of it was built with just money. Money was the byproduct. It was never the foundation." I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "So," I continued, needing her to see the whole truth, "do you know why this city listens to me? Why a single phone call can change a man's entire day? It's not because of the numbers in my bank account. It's because of the names in my ledger, the ones with the words paid in full next to them, even when no money ever changed hands." I gave her the truth she deserved. In 1982, when the O'Connell's catering business was about to go under because their main oven broke, the banks all said no. I co-signed the loan. Today, their son, Michael O'Connell, runs the biggest catering kitchen in the state. When Maria Sanchez's husband passed away in '95, she was a widow with 3 kids and couldn't afford a proper funeral. We supplied everything, from the tents to the chairs, no charge. Her oldest grandson is now a city councilman who sits on the zoning board. Every young chef, every hopeful wedding planner who came to me over the last 50 years with a fire in their heart and nothing in their pockets, I gave them a chance. I extended them credit. I gave them advice. I invested in them. I reached out and gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to see the lesson in my eyes. "I didn't build an empire of inventory, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I built an empire of respect. I built it on a currency of loyalty and goodwill that takes a lifetime to earn and a moment of arrogance to lose. That is my fortune, Amelia. That is your inheritance. And it is a fortune that his money, no matter how much of it he thinks he has, can never, ever buy." And with that, the last wall of her denial crumbled. A gut-wrenching sob escaped her lips, the sound of a heart breaking and a soul beginning to heal all at the same time. The lesson, as painful as it was, had been delivered. My final words fell into the quiet of the garden, and the world seemed to hold its breath. I had laid the truth bare, the entire 50-year history of my life's philosophy, and placed it at my daughter's feet. Now all I could do was watch and wait. I saw the battle happening in her eyes. It was a storm of confusion, denial, and a slowly dawning, horrifying clarity. It was like watching a dam crack, hairline fractures spreading across a surface that had seemed so solid just moments before, holding back a lifetime of suppressed intuition. She looked at Preston, and I knew in that moment that she was seeing him for the first time. She wasn't seeing the charming, handsome fiancé, the successful man who promised her a life of glamour. She was seeing a stranger, a petulant, angry child whose entire world had been reduced to the singular, selfish tragedy of a canceled party. His face was not filled with concern for her tears, for the monumental family crisis unfolding around them. It was twisted with a furious, entitled rage. He even proved me right, his voice a desperate, whining sneer. "Respect," he spat, looking at me with pure hatred. "What is that even worth? Will respect get me a seat on the board? Will respect close the Henderson deal? You haven't built an empire, old man. You've built a charity, and you just used it to ruin me." He didn't get it. He never would. He was a man speaking a language I could never understand, a language where a human being's worth was measured only by their utility. Then Amelia turned her gaze to me. In my face, I know she did not see anger or triumph. She saw only the deep, sorrowful lines of a father's love. She saw the quiet strength of the man who had taught her to value honesty above all else. She saw the 50 years of hard work, the early mornings and late nights, the calloused hands, and the unwavering integrity. She saw the legacy of Loretta, a legacy of kindness and community, standing in stark contrast to the shallow, self-serving ambition of the man beside her. She was looking at two empires, and for the first time, she was finally seeing which one was built on solid ground and which one was built on sand. And that was when the dam broke. It started not as a sound, but as a tremor that ran through her entire body. Her shoulders began to shake, her carefully composed posture collapsing inward, as if under an immense, invisible weight. A sound tore from her throat, a choked, desperate gasp for air. And then came the sob. It was not the simple cry of a disappointed bride. It was a deep, wrenching sound that came from the very core of her being. It was the sound of a heart breaking in two. I knew what that sound was. I understood every layer of its sorrow. It was the sound of her mourning the man she thought she loved, the illusion of the future she had so desperately wanted to believe in. It was the sound of a deep and profound shame for her own blindness, for the weakness that had allowed her to stand by while her own father was disrespected and discarded. And underneath it all, there was another note, a quieter one. It was the sound of relief, the terrifying, painful, and ultimately cleansing relief that comes from finally seeing the truth. Preston just stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. He saw her tears, not as a sign of her heartbreak, but as an inconvenience, another frustrating complication in his already ruined day. He made no move to comfort her, no gesture of kindness. He had already proven my point more eloquently than I ever could. I remained still. I did not rush to her, did not pull her into my arms. This was her moment. This was a pain she had to feel, a fever that had to break on its own. I would be here. I would be her safe harbor when the storm passed. But she had to navigate the storm herself. So I stood there, a silent, steady pillar in the wreckage of her wedding day, and let my daughter cry. I let her wash away the lies with her tears, knowing that when she was done, she would finally be free. The storm in the garden had passed. All that remained was the quiet, shuddering aftermath. Amelia's raw sobs had subsided into a series of deep, hiccuping breaths. Preston stood frozen, a statue of impotent rage, the accusations dead on his lips. The air was thick with unspoken truths and the sweet scent of Loretta's roses. I looked at my daughter, her face streaked with tears and mascara, and I knew the lesson was not yet complete. The confrontation was over. Now the decision had to be made. "Let's go inside," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I turned and walked toward the house, not looking back to see if they would follow. I knew they would. We stepped into the living room, the heart of my home. It was a world away from the cold, minimalist luxury of their penthouse. Here, the walls were lined with books and crowded with framed photographs that chronicled a lifetime of ordinary, beautiful moments. Amelia as a baby covered in spaghetti, Loretta and I on our own wedding day, young and impossibly hopeful. The furniture was old and comfortable, each piece worn smooth with use and memory. It was a room that smelled of lemon polish and a wood-burning fire. A room built to hold a family, not just to impress strangers. I did not sit down. I stood by the fireplace, directly beneath the oil painting of Loretta that I'd had commissioned for our 30th anniversary. I could feel her presence there, her quiet strength lending me its own. Preston and Amelia stood awkwardly in the center of the room, two displaced people who no longer knew their roles. I decided to start with the one thing Preston still thought he had a claim to. "The $200,000 is safe," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the emotional haze. I looked directly at Preston, making sure he understood the words that came next. "But we need to be perfectly clear about what that money is and what it is not. It is not a wedding gift. It is not a business investment to advance your career. It is not, nor was it ever, your money to control." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had no ground left to stand on. I then turned my full attention to my daughter, and my voice softened. "That money, Amelia, is the sum of 50 years of your mother's and my hard work. It is every early morning, every late night, every risk we ever took. It is the inheritance she wanted you to have. It is her legacy, her belief in you put into a trust for your future. It was never his to be uninvited from. I walked over to the old secretary desk in the corner, a piece I had built with my own hands the year Amelia was born. I opened a drawer and took out a single manila folder and a fountain pen. I walked to the coffee table and placed them in front of my daughter. The choice now would be made real. Today you have a choice to make, Amelia, I said, my voice low and serious. This is perhaps the most important choice of your life. Not as a bride, but as a woman. I let her look at the folder, at the pen, before I continued. I had to lay out both paths for her, so she could see them clearly. Here is your first option, I said. You can take the money, all of it. That folder contains the bank documents. All it needs is your signature, and every last dollar will be transferred to an account in your name only. You can take it, find a justice of the peace, and marry this man. I gestured to Preston. You can marry the man who has shown you, in no uncertain terms, exactly what you and your family are worth to him. If that is your choice, I will not stand in your way. I will wish you well, and you will not hear from me again. I paused, letting the weight of that future settle in the room. Then I offered her the second path. Or, I said, my voice filled with a desperate fatherly hope, you can recognize that you are worth more than that. You can decide that your mother's legacy, your inheritance, and your own future should not be used to purchase the approval of a man who looks at you and sees a business transaction. You can take that money, and you can build something for yourself, a business of your own, a home that is truly yours, a life, something real, something solid, something that no one ever again can call unimportant. I stepped back from the table, leaving a space for her decision. The folder and the pen sat between them, a silent testament to the two futures that lay before her. I saw Preston's eyes flicker to the folder, a flash of greedy, desperate hope that he might still get the money. He still didn't understand. This was never about the money. Amelia looked down at the folder. She looked over at Preston, at his anxious, selfish face, and then she looked up at me. Her eyes were red and swollen, but for the first time all day, they were clear. The power to decide her own fate was now finally and completely in her hands. The choice lay on the table between them, contained in a simple manila folder and a black fountain pen. The entire weight of two possible futures rested in that small space. I had said my piece. I had laid the truth before my daughter. Now I could only stand by the fireplace and watch, my heart in my throat. The room was utterly silent. The only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had measured out every important moment of my daughter's life. Preston stared at the folder, his eyes narrowed with a desperate, greedy calculation. I could see him trying to salvage the situation, trying to figure out which path still led to the money. He looked at Amelia, his expression shifting into a mask of feigned concern, a pathetic attempt to regain control. Amelia, honey, he began, his voice slick and persuasive. Don't listen to him. We can still fix this. We can take the money. We can go to Vegas. But his words died in his throat because Amelia was no longer listening to him. She was no longer looking at him. She was looking down at her own hands, at the massive, ostentatious diamond ring he had placed on her finger months ago. It had once been a symbol of a bright and glamorous future. Now, in the warm, honest light of her childhood home, it just looked like a beautiful, expensive cage. I watched her take a single deep, shuddering breath. It was the kind of breath you take before you dive into cold water. The kind you take before you do something difficult, but necessary. When she lifted her head, the change in her was staggering. The tears were still wet on her cheeks, but the confusion and fear in her eyes were gone. They had been replaced by a quiet, resolute strength I hadn't seen in years. It was the look of her mother. She turned her head and looked at Preston. She looked at him for a long, silent moment, and I knew she was seeing him, truly seeing him, for the very first time. She was not seeing the charming fiancé. She was seeing the frightened boy who had thrown a tantrum in her father's garden. She was seeing the man whose first instinct in a crisis was to lie, to blame, and to lash out. She saw his eyes flicker again to the folder on the table, and she understood with devastating clarity that even now he was not thinking of her heart. He was thinking of her inheritance. Then, with a calm, deliberate grace that seemed to suck all the air out of the room, She began to remove the ring. She used her other hand to steady her finger, slowly working the heavy diamond over her knuckle. It was not an act of anger. It was an act of liberation. The ring came free, leaving a pale, faint indentation on her skin, the ghost of a promise that was never real. She leaned forward and placed the diamond ring on the glass surface of the coffee table. In the heavy silence of the room, the small sound was as loud and final as a gunshot. A single, sharp, definitive clack. It was the sound of a cage door swinging open. It was the sound of the end. She looked Preston directly in the eye. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the weak, hesitant whisper he had grown used to. It was clear, steady, and unbreakable. "It's over, Preston," she said. "I choose my legacy. I choose respect." For a moment, he just stared at her, his face a kaleidoscope of disbelief, then fury, and finally a deep and bitter humiliation. He had lost. He had lost the money. He had lost the wedding. He had lost the prize he thought he owned. And he had lost it all because he had failed to understand the value of a single unimportant old man. There was nothing left for him to say. The lies were useless now. He lunged forward, not at her, but at the ring. He snatched it off the table, his movements jerky and graceless. He didn't look at either of us again. He just turned his back, stiff with defeat, and walked out of the living room, out of the house, and out of my daughter's life. The front door clicked shut behind him, and the silence he left in his wake was not heavy or tense. It was peaceful. It was clean. It was the sound of freedom. The front door clicked shut, and in the profound quiet of my living room, I stood with my daughter. The battle was over. The enemy, who had turned out to be nothing more than a frightened boy with a loud voice, was gone. All that was left was the two of us standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to be her wedding day. She looked at me, her eyes clear and full of a painful, newfound wisdom. She didn't need to say a word. I just opened my arms, and she stepped into them. She cried for a long time, but these were different tears. They were the tears of a daughter who had finally come home. 3 months have passed since that day. The seasons have turned. Autumn has settled over Atlanta, painting the leaves of the old oak trees in shades of amber and gold. I'm walking down a street I haven't visited in years, a part of the city that's been reborn, full of art galleries, coffee shops, and the vibrant energy of new beginnings. I stop in front of a storefront with a large, clean window. Inside I see her, my Amelia. She is not the person I saw that day in the garden. The haunted, hesitant girl is gone. This woman is confident, alive. She's standing in the middle of a bright, airy studio, pointing at a design on a large computer screen, speaking with authority to a young couple who are listening, rapt. Her hair is tied back. She has a smudge of charcoal on her cheek, and she is laughing. A real, genuine laugh that fills the entire space. It is the most beautiful sound in the world. I watch her for a long moment, my heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost takes my breath away. She is not just surviving, she is thriving. I push open the door, a small bell chiming overhead. She turns, and when she sees me, her face breaks into a brilliant smile. "Daddy," she says, and rushes to give me a hug. It's not the desperate, clinging hug of that day. It's a strong, warm embrace, full of an easy love that has been healed and made stronger by the fire it walked through. "I brought you something," I say, holding up the object I'm carrying, wrapped in simple brown paper. "A little something for the front door to make it official." She takes it from me, her brow furrowed with curiosity. She carefully tears away the paper. Underneath is a sign carved from a single, solid piece of golden oak, the kind of wood that lasts for centuries. The letters are deep and elegant, carved with the same tools that built the jewelry box I never finished. Her breath catches in her throat as she reads the words aloud, her voice a reverent whisper. "Loretta Design Company." Her eyes fill with tears, but these are not the tears of sorrow I saw in the garden. These are tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She runs a hand over her mother's name, a name that is now intertwined with her own future, her own work, her own identity. She understands. She understands that this is not just a business. It is a legacy, a connection to the strong, wonderful woman who gave her life, and to the values that will now guide her. "It's perfect, Daddy," she whispers, her voice thick with emotion. "It's absolutely perfect." She puts the sign down gently and hugs me again, burying her face in my shoulder. I hold my daughter tight, this strong, wonderful woman she has become, and I look at the name carved into the wood, Loretta. In the end, the wedding vanished. An illusion was shattered. A $200,000 party disappeared into thin air. But in its place, something real and true had been allowed to grow. My daughter's strength, her independence, her self-respect. A legacy had been saved, and a new one had just begun. And I knew in that moment, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my Loretta, my beautiful, strong Loretta, would have been so proud. This whole experience taught me a profound lesson that I wish to share with you all. True strength is not measured by the size of your bank account, but by the depth of the respect you have earned. For a time, I stood by silently, fearing that creating conflict would push my daughter away. But I learned that sometimes the greatest act of a father's love is not to build a smooth road for his child, but to allow them to face a difficult truth, no matter how painful. A broken wedding is a temporary sorrow, but a life built on a foundation of disrespect is a permanent tragedy. I'd be honored to hear your thoughts on my decision in the comments below. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories.